easy. Don't get too excited. Thank you, thank you. Don't get too excited. That's one of two Georgian words I know. The other is khachapuri, of course. Nothing to brag about. Let me ask you a question. How many of you in the audience today, actually not tonight, are journalists or reporters? One, two, all right, quite a few, quite a few. And how many of you consider themselves storytellers or data storytellers? Okay, a little bit more, that's great. So just to start off, I'm gonna show you one very cool tool which can help with one of the most boring, one of the most tedious tasks you always have to do, or usually have to do when you are a journalist, a reporter, or a storyteller, especially when you deal with other human beings. And I'm talking, of course, about transcribing interviews.
Insert bullet list. 1/2 bag of chocolate chips. New line. 1 cup of flour. New line. 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. New line. 1/2 cup of butter. Select cup of butter. Avocado. Resume with dads. Bold. Healthier. Smiley face.
So I'm not sure everyone could see very well. It's a voice typing tool which is available in Google Docs for free to everyone. You just open a Google Doc, go to Tools, click Voice Typing, then select your language, and yes, it works in Georgian. I'm not able to present it to you live because of the knowledge of only 2 words, but tomorrow I have a workshop, and I'm going to make sure that at the beginning we're going to test it in Georgian and a few other languages. So for all the storytellers, this small tool, which is not perfect, can help you with the tedious task, which is, of course, transcribing interviews. Now, I myself am also very excited about this tool, and I'm using it. It's not connected with data, but it's powered by artificial intelligence, obviously. I use this a lot, so my background, before joining Google last year, I've worked as a journalist for 8 or almost 9 years. These are some of the newsrooms I published at or worked at in different capacities. I also worked as data journalist for some time. I worked a lot with open data, with data visualization, and other things like that. So I'm not a tech expert in the room, unfortunately. I don't know how to code. I don't know a lot about data science from the inside. But what I know is how to use it to make a good story for other people. And I'm going to share with you some of those stories today. Now, after being a journalist for a few years, I decided I can take a break. It's time to take a break. So I applied and got a role as a teaching fellow for Central and Eastern Europe at Google News Lab. And I started it. So who here heard of Google before today? Yeah, just a few hands. Yeah, that's good. Great. So this is Google's mission, and it's to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Now, I work with a team within Google that's called Google News Lab, and we are a team of journalists and ex-journalists that travel around the world and work with journalists and entrepreneurs to drive innovation in the newsroom. And this really comes back to the whole motto of Google. So organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful, which is what every journalist and storyteller also does, right? So that's where the interest of Google and other journalists and storytellers align. It's pretty much the same. Now, Google News Lab is a part of this bigger effort from Google, which is called Google News Initiative, and it's concentrated around those 3 main buckets, which are products, partnerships, and programs, and Google News Lab is one of the programs. So let's talk a little bit how Google News Lab and Google help some storytellers when it comes to using machine learning in data-driven stories. Now, first thing to say is that if you've ever used almost any of the Google products, it can be Gmail, it can be Google Docs, Google Sheets, even Google Search or Google Maps, they're all powered by machine learning. And I don't have any secret knowledge about the future of Google and the future of tech industry, but I can tell you that looking at what's happening at Google and other companies from inside and from outside, artificial intelligence is massively important to everyone, especially the CEOs. And the companies are investing a lot of money, and every year it's going to get even more important. But I do also believe that machine learning is the next frontier in the great data-driven storytelling. And just to illustrate that with one of the examples, let's take an issue of overfishing. I don't know if you knew about it, I didn't before. 3 billion people around the world rely on fish as their primary source of protein, right? That's quite a lot, almost half of the whole world. But an issue is that 85% of all the fisheries in the world are either overfished at capacity or recovering, 85%. 1 in 5 fish caught comes from an illegal or undocumented source, which is terrible, right? Because that means business is extremely unsustainable. To show you the scale of the problem, this is a photo of fish trawlers coming out from just one port in China after a 3-month moratorium was lifted. After just 3 months of no fishing, right? It's quite a lot of fish trawlers. But that's not all. If we zoom out, it's the same city, the same day, the same morning. Sea trawlers go out to the sea after lifting a moratorium that lasted for 3 months. Let's zoom out again. Now you see the real scale of a problem, right? The city is called Ningbo. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And it's just one city in China. And if you realize that there are tens of thousands different entities, private companies, governments involved in the fishing industry, you can actually start realizing the scale of the problem of overfishing. So a lot of amazing newsrooms tackled the issue and told stories about overfishing based on data. So for instance, this story by the great International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and it's a consortium that's behind an investigation into Panama Papers. I'm sure you all heard about it. So in 2012, they've written this series of stories about overfishing. They've sent a lot of requests to government for fishing data. The government said no, then they said please. The government said no again. And it lasted for a while, and then they managed to get the data from their sources, not from the government. So the way it worked, I think, was that they looked into the data about ships that were fishing, and they compared that to data of the weight of the fish that was caught, and they looked for discrepancies in that data. But that's a very tedious, time-consuming, and resource-consuming task, right? This is very, very difficult. I mean, this is a great story, but still it's very difficult to do that at capacity. Now, fast forward to today, Google partnered with Skytruth and Oceana to create an AI-powered tool called Global Fishing Watch, which monitors almost all fishing ships in the world in nearly real time. So how does it work? Every ship emits a signal which is called AIS, and we can track down the ship's movement. So the database did that. But what they also did is they created an algorithm, a machine learning algorithm that is able to recognize by the pattern of the ship's movement, the class of a vessel and whether a ship is fishing at that very moment or not. And it looks a little bit like this. And it's pretty accurate. So it actually can recognize all the class of the fish and then forecast how much fish did this ship caught, right? So I think it's based on 20 million AIS positions a day. So quite a lot, right? I don't know how many human beings would we require to analyze this amount of data. And it actually proved very, very useful, not only for journalists. So for instance, Global Fishing Watch provided evidence to a very small island nation of Kiribati. They were able to prosecute one company for overfishing, and they won. And they won $2.2 million fine, which in the case of Kiribati is equivalent to 1% of the country's total GDP, which is quite substantial, right? Now, Global Fishing Watch is still live, and it's an open source data, so anyone can use it. And we're working with NGOs to also look at different issues around fishing, such as, for instance, to crack down on, to improve the whole supply chain and crack down, for instance, on slavery in fishing. But of course, journalists use that data, as in this story from the New York Times magazine, and it's strictly about overfishing. But also, journalists use that story, in this case from Reuters, to show how environmental catastrophes can affect the whole supply chain in the fishing industry. Now I'm going to give you a few other examples of using AI for data-driven reporting. This is a story from BuzzFeed from a while ago, and BuzzFeed created an algorithm which analyzed flight patterns of all the planes in the world and tried to guess which planes might be spy planes based on their flight patterns, because apparently, or obviously, spy planes the flight pattern of spy planes would look a little bit different than of commercial jets, for instance. However, just to make a note, the AI here was just the beginning of the whole story. So after that, after they had a bit of knowledge of which planes could be spy planes, then the reporters went out to their sources, to governments, and they were combing through government documents, and that's how they nailed down the bigger picture of the story, right? So they combined the very traditional way of reporting with AI data-driven storytelling. Another example, this is from the US-based NGO ProPublica, which partnered with Google. And, hate crime is a big issue, I think, all around the world today, in the US as well. But in the US, there's no central database of hate crimes. So what ProPublica did, they used the Google's natural language API, and they've used it in a way that it looked through a raw feed of Google News every day, so a lot of news stories, to spot people, places, and issues that could be hate crimes, right? And the whole database was then visualized and made available for free to journalists, and then journalists are able to search through the whole data and get some stories out of it. Again, an example a database basically, which would be impossible to make with a traditional data-driven work. Another example, I think it was 2 years ago that Jigsaw, which is part of the Google family, partnered with New York Times to create this dashboard, which encourages healthier conversations around the news stories that the New York Times published. So the way it works, it enables the algorithm goes through all the comments on the New York Times website, and then it rates them on a toxicity scale. So how toxic the comments are perceived to be. And the way it works is that humans fed the algorithm 100,000 of different comments, which were then labeled on a scale of toxicity by human beings, and the algorithm learned how to recognize those toxic comments themselves. And you can actually test the tool on the Jigsaw website. It's called Perspective, and it's really, really cool. So there's a slider, you can grab it, and you can actually show comments based on the toxicity scale. And as you go, as you use the thingy, it kind of shows you more or less toxic comments as you wish. Last one example, it's not very complicated one, but still very cool. So Vice, which is a big publishing house, Vice publishes, I think they have 500 editors, and they publish their content in 18 languages now. So what they did, they incorporated Google Translate into their content management system, and they are able now to translate any story in real time. Obviously, there's an editor looking through the story, but it makes things much more faster. And no one is now excluded because they're not able to read a great story in the language that they don't know. So say, I would love to read a story in Georgian. I can't unless it's about Hachapuri. But with this tool, I'm able to do that. And again, Google Translate is getting better every day, and it's also based on machine learning, obviously, similarly to voice typing. Now, my last slide, I just smuggled it here. It's not really about AI or data, so I apologize for that, but it's about something even more important, I think. So it's about staying safe online. So for all the people who work with data, especially sensitive data, you need to make sure to stay safe online. And it's not only creating your password, which is, it's not admin123 or something ridiculous like that. Google has a bunch of tools, all of them are free, that can help you very quickly improve your safety online. So, for instance, you can install a plugin to your Chrome browser, which is called Smart Lock. And Smart Lock will, each time you type in your Google password anywhere else than Google websites, it's going to alert you. So if someone, you're a victim of a phishing attack, and someone creates a website that looks exactly like Google, and you won't know that it's not a Google website, and you type in your password there, Smart Lock will alert you that something's wrong, you should change your password. You can set up two-step verification, so each time you log on to your Google account from a different computer, you get a text message or a phone call, and you have to input a code. Or if you're really worried, if you work with very sensitive data, or if you are an investigative journalist, you can sign up for Advanced Protection Program, which works similar to the two-step verification, but instead of typing in a code, you use a physical security key. So you go online, buy, it's not very expensive, buy a physical USB security key, and then each time you log on into a new computer or a new mobile phone or whatever, you are required to plug in the security key. It can also work with Bluetooth. So you can learn more, and this is really my last slide, I promise. You can learn more about security, but also data-driven storytelling, about verification, and all the things that matter for a digital storyteller on our website, which is dg.co/newstraining. And as of now, we have 55 lessons available in 12 languages, and it's growing. So Georgian is not yet available, but we're hopefully working on it. But among those 12 languages is English, obviously, Russian, Portuguese, Spanish, German, French, etc. All the lessons were designed with journalists in mind. However, they are available to everyone, and they are available for free. So it's a mix of videos, text, and you can log on immediately and for free improve your knowledge about pretty much everything. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you.